Welcome to Books in Brief. Today we're diving deep into a topic that really determines whether we sink or swim in this modern world, and that's the ability to change our minds. We're unpacking the ideas from Leonard Mlodinov's book, Elastic, Flexible Thinking in a Time of Change.
Exactly. Our mission today is really to get into the psychology, the neuroscience of how we adapt. The research Mlodinov pulls together makes a powerful case that thriving today hinges almost entirely on cultivating what he calls elastic thinking.
Which is that non-algorithmic, imaginative kind of thought, right?
Yeah.
The kind that actively looks for new ways of doing things, for disruption.
Yeah, for solutions that simple linear logic just can't find.
Okay, so let's start with the fundamental contrast that Mlodinow sets up. It's this difference between our fixed or, scripted behavior and that truly flexible kind of thought. We spend so much of our day just on autopilot.
We do, and it's incredibly efficient, right?
Right.
But only until the environment shifts. Mlodinow has some great examples with simple organisms to show this rigidity. Think about the nematode. Its response to a lack of food is completely hardwired. It literally seeks out slug excrement to hitchhike to a new spot.
It's a perfect fixed solution, but only for a problem that keeps repeating itself.
It's pure evolutionary programming. And you see it fail even in more complex creatures the second a new variable comes in.
Like the brooding goose example. It's a classic.
It is. If an egg rolls out of the nest, the goose instinctively extends its neck to roll it back. And here's the key part. If you snatch that egg away mid-roll, the goose just keeps going.
It completes the motion. The script can't be stopped once it starts. It just completely fails the novelty test.
And that's really the core distinction for humanity. I mean, our ancestors didn't survive because they were physically superior. We're outclassed by so many primates.
Oh, yeah. A chimp has double our arm strength. A bonobo can jump twice as high.
We overcame all of that through innovation, through social cooperation, and this unique ability to just invent a solution when there wasn't one. Elastic thinking is literally the reason we're here.
Which brings us to a really fascinating point that Mlodinow explores, that this deep drive for novelty, it isn't just something we learn. It's actually baked into our biology.
Absolutely. The theory is that throughout human history, these major catastrophic environmental shifts, they acted as a kind of massive genetic filter.
So in those moments of huge instability, the cautious ones were weeded out.
In a sense, yeah. Those periods rewarded individuals with an almost reckless desire to explore. The people who just stayed home, sticking rigidly to their old routines, they simply had a lower chance of survival when the world changed around them.
And this is tied to an actual gene.
It is. It's tied to a specific genetic variant called DRD47R. And to get why this matters, you have to remember what dopamine does. It's the neurotransmitter that fuels our reward system. It's what tells our brain, hey, that felt good, let's do that again.
No, it reinforces our behavior.
Yes. Now, people with this DRD47R variant, their dopamine receptors respond more weakly to that signal. They get, less of a reward hit from normal things.
So they need more stimulation to feel satisfied.
Exactly. More novelty, bigger risks, farther exploration. They're sort of genetically engineered explorers, always seeking that next big thing to get the same level of satisfaction.
That's a deep connection. That feeling of restlessness is literally a chemical thing. And the evidence, the geographic evidence for this is just stunning.
It really is. When you trace human migration patterns out of Africa, you see this incredible correlation. The farther our ancestors migrated from that original source, the higher the prevalence of this DOD47R gene is in those modern populations.
So you see much higher rates in groups that went on these huge journeys compared to those that, say, settled closer by in Ethiopia or Yemen.
Precisely.
Okay, so if we have this deep genetic drive pushing us toward novelty, why do we constantly fall back on these fixed scripts and fight change in our day-to-day lives?
Because the pull of habit is just so powerful. I mean, fixed thinking is fast, it's low energy. Even when we're presented with obviously better technology, people cling to what they know.
Like the touch-tone phone.
Who?
That's a great example from the book.
It is. Bell introduced it in 1963. It was instant. It offered menus, a huge advantage. But 30 years later, in the 1990s, the majority of customers still hadn't switched from their old rotary phones.
It took regulatory changes to finally push people over, not just a better product.
It just shows that comfort is often a much bigger motivator than efficiency.
And that comfort lets us fall into this mindless adherence to social rules. which is kind of terrifying when you think about that famous copy machine experiment.
Oh, that experiment is brilliant. It just perfectly captures the power of the social script.
Walk us through that one.
Okay, so a researcher asks to cut in a small line at a copy machine with no reason. Only about 60% of people agree.
Fine.
When they offer a real reason because I'm in a rush, it jumps to 94%.
That makes sense. But here's the twist.
Here's the twist. When they offer a totally useless dummy reason, because I need to make copies, which is obviously what everyone in line is there to do,
Right.
the success rate was still 93%.
So the content of the reason didn't matter at all. It was just the word because.
Exactly. It triggered a deep-seated mental script. If someone asks and gives an explanation, just agree. People completely bypassed the critical, elastic step of judging if the reason was any good.
Wow. That really makes you wonder how many of your daily interactions are just running on one of those mindless scripts. And when you apply that to professional life, you run into this idea of frozen thinking.
Right. Frozen thinking or cognitive dogmatism. These are ideas we adopted a long time ago and just stopped questioning. In science, Thomas Kuhn called this a paradigm. And if you're trapped inside a paradigm, you literally can't even conceive of a different solution.
And this leads right to what Mlodinov calls the expert trap, which is such a dangerous paradox. The very things that make you an expert deep knowledge, rapid pattern recognition, can actually blind you.
It's that over-reliance on the script. He cites this really alarming study from the Journal of the American Medical Association. They tracked high-risk hospital patients for a decade.
And what did they find?
They found that the 30-day mortality rate was statistically lower, about a third lower, when the most experienced senior doctors were away at conferences.
That seems so counterintuitive. You'd think you'd want the best doctors there.
You would. But the findings suggest that the junior doctors, because they lacked that same confidence and that huge database of fixed procedures, they were forced to be more open-minded. They approached unusual cases with more caution.
They didn't jump to conclusions as quickly.
Exactly. They were less likely to just quickly fit a patient into a known category. The experts, on the other hand, were more likely to see a familial pattern, which led to faster but sometimes fatally flawed decisions.
A truly high-stakes failure of elasticity. You see the same thing in major intelligence failures, too.
Oh, absolutely. Look at the massive Israeli intelligence failure before the 1973 Yom Kippur War. Israeli intelligence was arguably the best in the world, but they were utterly convinced that the Egyptian forces were just engaging in a routine military exercise.
Even with all the evidence to the contrary. Troops massing at the border.
Yes. They discounted everything. Massing troops. Public declarations from the enemy. They ignored it all because they were blinded by their fixed paradigm.
Which was?
The enemy will not attack until they have air superiority, which they don't. They were brilliant, but their thinking was frozen. They couldn't restructure the problem to consider that maybe, just maybe, the enemy had a totally different strategy in mind.
And that failure to restructure, that's really the heart of functional fixedness, isn't it? Being unable to see a familiar object or a familiar situation in a new way.
It is, and it's something you can see so clearly with certain kinds of riddles.
Okay, let's try one.
All right, the mutilated checkerboard riddle. You have a standard 8x8 checkerboard, so 64 squares. You remove 2 diagonally opposite corners. That leaves 62 squares. You have 31 dominoes. Can you cover the entire board?
My first instinct, my linear brain, is to start trying to visualize placing the dominoes, trying to figure out a pattern. And that just feels overwhelming.
And that's the trap. That's the fixed thinking. You're stuck on the literal placement. The only way to solve it is to abandon that physical image and restructure the problem around its underlying rules.
Okay.
So if you remove 2 diagonally opposite corners, what has to be true about the color of those squares?
Oh, they have to be the same color. Let's say we remove 2 white squares.
Exactly. So now you have 30 white squares and 32 black squares left on the board. Now think about the domino. What's the rule of a domino?
Every single domino has to cover 1 white square and 1 black square.
Oh.
So it's impossible. 30 dominoes can cover 30 white and 30 black squares. But you'll always have 2 black squares left over with nothing to match them.
Mathematically impossible. The solution required that jump, that insight. And that jump is the heart of elastic thinking.
So how do we get there? How do we cultivate that leap and access that nonlinear mode more often?
Well, a crucial piece of the puzzle, surprisingly, is emotion. We tend to think of creative genius as this purely intellectual thing, but Mlodinow really stresses the role of our reward system in just making choices.
Right, the tragic case of patient EVR.
Exactly. He was a brilliant man, high IQ, but he had surgery that damaged his orbitofrontal cortex. This is essentially the brain's emotional tagging system.
The part that puts a good feeling or bad feeling sticker on an outcome.
Precisely. And without that, EVR couldn't experience conscious emotional pleasure, and his life just crumbled. He became paralyzed by the simplest decisions, like where to go for lunch,
Aye.
because he had no emotional will, no desire to enjoy the meal to drive his choice. He could list out the pros and cons for hours, but he couldn't generate a preference.
That is fascinating. Without emotional input to set your goals, pure logic is useless. It means real innovation needs not just logic, but also desire.
It does. And that desire, that insight, it's often triggered during periods of relaxation. Which brings us to the default network, or DN.
Okay, what's that?
The DN is like your brain's interior mental engine. It gets most active when we shift our attention away from the outside world.
So when you stop staring at a spreadsheet and just, space out for a bit.
Exactly. And when the DN kicks in, it starts rummaging through this huge internal database of memories and knowledge and half-formed ideas, and it makes these unusual, uncensored connections. The kinds of connections the logical part of your brain would immediately dismiss as nonsense.
Which explains that classic eureka moment. Like Mary Shelley, struggling to write a ghost story. The vision for Frankenstein only came to her after she stopped consciously trying, when her mind was just relaxed.
Or the strategist Francis Lowe, who was tasked with this near-impossible attack after Pearl Harbor. Logically, launching heavy bombers off an aircraft carrier was impossible. His conscious, focused mind rejected it over and over.
But the insight for the Doolittle raid came to him when he wasn't even thinking about it.
It came to him while he was just idling, watching planes take off. His relaxed mind made a connection his focused mind had forbidden.
So, the lesson is, if we want more insight, we need more practical aimlessness. We have to intentionally build that non-productive time back into our lives.
Absolutely. Go for a walk without your phone. Lie in bed for a few minutes when you wake up without grabbing it. If you don't have that downtime, the default network never gets a chance to connect the dots.
So let's talk about some specific tools. Mlodinow points to a really tactical advantage we can get by understanding our own personal rhythms.
Yeah, and it's highly counterintuitive.
Yeah.
We think focused analytical work, the stuff using your prefrontal cortex, is best done during your peak hours when you're sharp.
Right.
But studies show that solving creative problems, the ones that need that restructuring, that elastic thinking, that's actually better done during your off-peak hours.
When you're a bit tired or unfocused, how does that work?
Because when you're fatigued, your attentional focus gets more diffuse. Your cognitive filters are a little bit looser, and that wider search through your brain's network increases the odds of making one of those remote, weird associations that you need for a breakthrough.
So do your taxes at 10 a.m. when you're sharp, but brainstorm the big new project at 3 p.m. when you're starting to fade.
Exactly. Another tool is to actively incorporate discord. You have to expose yourself to opposing ideas to shake up your own frozen thinking. Mlodinow talks about the Moscovici color study.
Where they showed people blue slides.
Right. And in one group, a couple people in on the experiment just kept insisting the blue slides were green.
They introduced a conflicting view into a known reality.
Yes. And later, when those same subjects were privately asked to classify ambiguous paint chips, just having heard that earlier argument made them classify more of the chips on the green side of the spectrum. The dissension literally broadened their perceptual framework.
So what about our internal filters? How do we regulate those?
Well, our brain uses the lateral prefrontal cortex to filter out useless ideas so we aren't just overwhelmed by noise. But some people, often highly creative nonconformists, think of eccentrics like Tesla or great jazz musicians, have what's called high schizotypy.
And we should be clear, this is a personality trait, not a disorder.
Precisely. It just means they have naturally lax cognitive filters. They don't immediately reject the bizarre or the non sequitur. This allows for a huge generation of unusual ideas. Their challenge isn't generating ideas, it's taming them with that equally strong analytical side.
So wrapping this all up, what does this mean for us? Mlodinow's big takeaway seems to be that we all have these two thinkers in one, the logician and the poet. And thriving in a world that's always changing is about learning how to shift between those two modes.
And it isn't just for inventing rockets, it's for everyday life. Mlodinow brings it back to his mother's saying, Where there's a will, there's a way. She used elastic thinking to overcome tiny obstacles, like figuring out how to get a partial refund on a cheap blender. It's about generating small, original ideas.
The constant invention of a new path when the old one is blocked. Which brings us back to patient EVR. The lesson there was that emotion and pleasure are essential for making choices, for setting goals.
Which leaves you with a really provocative thought, especially when we think about the future of technology and AI. If human creativity requires not just calculation, but also desire, that deep intrinsic feeling, could the key to creating truly innovative artificial intelligence be to build a computer that solves problems because it actually enjoys solving them?
A machine that seeks satisfaction, not just efficiency. Now that is a truly flexible thought. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this brief exploration of the book, feel free to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel for future episodes. New book insights are coming soon. See you next time.